The iron gate closed with a sound that felt final. Ifeoma Anozie stood outside clutching a worn bag as Auntie Nkiru's voice rang out behind the fence, cold, unforgiving, declaring that Ifeoma was no longer family. Years of quiet obedience, of scrubbing floors and swallowing insults, ended in that single moment. She took a step back, stunned, as neighbors slowed to watch and then looked away. Her bag split open. Everything she owned lay exposed on the ground. A black SUV eased to a stop nearby. Inside, Kwame Mensah watched in silence, his attention drawn not only to the frightened young woman, but to the men lingering across the street, pretending not to notice her. By morning, Ifeoma would be branded a thief, and the truth would put her in danger. Before we step into the full story, tell us, what country are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? If stories of injustice, healing, and quiet strength speak to you, remember to subscribe and walk this journey with us. The night Ifeoma Anozie was cast out did not end when the gate closed. It followed her down the street, clung to her breath, and settled into her bones like a quiet verdict. She gathered her scattered clothes with shaking hands, folding them as neatly as she could, because neatness was the only dignity she had left. When she finally walked away, she did not look back. Looking back had never helped her before. Ifeoma had been 8 years old when she came to live with Auntie Nkiru. Her parents died within the same year. First her mother after a brief illness no one took seriously, then her father in a roadside accident that left nothing behind but debts and questions. At the funeral, people whispered about misfortune and bad timing. Nkiru had taken Ifeoma's hand and told everyone she would do the right thing. Ifeoma believed her. Children always do. The house was modest but respectable, with tiled floors that stayed cool even in the heat. On her first day there, Ifeoma slept on a mat near the kitchen and woke before dawn to the sound of pots clanging. From that morning on, her life followed a rhythm that did not belong to her. She washed dishes before school, swept the compound after cooked dinner, while her cousins watched television. When she asked about school fees, Nkiru would sigh loudly and remind her how lucky she was to be fed at all. By 14, Ifeoma had stopped asking questions. She learned how to anticipate Nkiru's moods, how to keep her eyes lowered when insults were thrown like small stones. "You should be grateful," Nkiru often said. "Some girls have nothing." Gratitude became a habit even when it hurt. The accusation came without warning. Nkiru stood in the living room holding an envelope, her voice already raised. "Money was missing," she said. "A large sum." Ifeoma felt the room tilt. She searched her memory for some mistake she might have made, some misunderstanding she could explain. But there was nothing. She had never even touched the drawer where Nkiru kept her cash. Neighbors were called. The story spread faster than the truth ever could. Ifeoma's pockets were searched. Her mat was turned over. When nothing was found, Nkiru's face hardened not with relief but with resolve. "She's clever," she told them. "She knows how to hide things." That night Ifeoma was ordered to leave. Now, hours later, she sat on a concrete bench near a closed shop, staring at the road until her eyes burned. She did not cry. Crying required safety, and she had none. When dawn came, it arrived quietly, with the sound of buses starting their routes and vendors setting up stalls. Hunger crept in slowly, then all at once. She spent the morning walking. She asked at small shops, at construction sites, at homes with open gates. Most people barely looked at her. Some did, and shook their heads before she finished speaking. By midday her legs ached and her throat was dry. She sat on the curb and pressed her palms together, whispering a prayer she barely believed in anymore. It was there that Mama Halima found her. Mama Halima sold food from a dented cart at the corner, rice and beans, simple and filling. She noticed Ifeoma's stillness, the way her eyes followed customers without hope. Without asking questions, she handed her a bowl. "Eat," she said. "You can talk later." Ifeoma ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it might disappear. When she finished, she tried to stand and nearly fell. Mama Halima steadied her with a firm hand. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Anywhere," Ifeoma said. It was the most honest answer she had. Mama Halima listened as Ifeoma spoke, her voice flat, careful. She did not interrupt. When the story ended, she nodded once. "This city," she said, "can swallow people whole. You must keep your eyes open." That afternoon, Mama Halima pointed her toward a clinic a few streets away that sometimes needed cleaners. Ifeoma thanked her, promising to return the bowl. As she walked, she rehearsed what she would say, how she would stand, how she would not look desperate. She reached the clinic just as raised voices spilled out onto the street. Two men in pressed shirts argued with a tired nurse near the entrance. Words like "delivery shortage" and "sign here" floated past. Ifeoma slowed instinctively, the way you do when something feels important but unclear. She caught fragments, numbers, dates, a name she didn't recognize. One man lowered his voice when he noticed her, his eyes narrowing. Ifeoma looked away and kept walking, unaware that she had already seen too much. The clinic had no work for her that day. She thanked them anyway and stepped back into the heat, her mind replaying the argument she had overheard. It meant nothing to her, or so she thought. She didn't know that moments like that, quiet and unremarkable, could mark a life. By evening, she found a place to sleep behind a row of closed kiosks. She wrapped her clothes around her shoulders and stared at the sky until sleep claimed her. Somewhere across the city, Auntie Nkiru told a story that painted herself as the victim. Somewhere else, men made plans that required a scapegoat, and Ifeoma Anozie, who had never stolen so much as a coin, drifted into uneasy dreams, unaware that the ground beneath her had already begun to shift. Morning arrived without ceremony. The city stretched awake in fragments, vendors shouting prices, buses coughing to life, the smell of frying oil mixing with dust. Ifeoma Anozie rose from behind the kiosks with a stiffness that surprised her. She folded her clothes carefully as if order could protect her and stepped into the current of people, moving with purpose she did not share. She walked until her feet learned the streets better than her mind did. Every turn offered the same question. Where do you go when you belong nowhere? She tried to keep her posture steady, her face neutral. Desperation, she had learned, frightened people away. It reminded them of how close misfortune could come. By late morning, hunger returned with a sharpness that stole her breath. She found Mama Halima's corner again, drawn by memory more than direction. The cart was busier. Today a small crowd gathered for plates of rice and beans. Mama Halima spotted Ifeoma immediately. She did not smile, did not ask questions. She simply nodded and slid a plate across the cart when the crowd thinned. "You look like someone who didn't sleep," Mama Halima said. "I slept," Ifeoma replied. "Just not enough." Mama Halima studied her face. "There are days like that," she said. "Sit, eat," as Ifeoma ate. Mama Halima spoke of practical things where day laborers sometimes found work, which neighborhoods were kinder to strangers, which ones were not. Her advice was not hopeful, but it was honest. When Ifeoma thanked her and stood to leave, Mama Halima pressed a folded piece of paper into her hand. "An address. Try there," she said, "and keep your head up." The address led Ifeoma toward a stretch of road lined with small offices and clinics. The buildings looked tired, but busy, their walls carrying years of notices and peeling paint. She rehearsed her introduction again, steadying her voice as she approached the first gate. The guard barely glanced at her. "No work." The second place sent her away with a practiced apology. At the third, a woman listened, sighed, and shook her head. "Come back next week," she said. It was not a promise. It was near the fourth building that raised voices caught Ifeoma's attention again. She slowed instinctively, staying close to the wall as two men stood near a parked van. Their conversation sharp and urgent. One of them gestured toward the clinic entrance, his hand slicing the air. "You can't just change the numbers," he said. "That's not what we agreed." The other man's jaw tightened. "You worry too much," he replied. "Everything will balance out. It always does. If it doesn't," the first said quietly, "someone will pay." Ifeoma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She kept her eyes down, her steps measured. She had learned early how to pass through rooms unnoticed, how to become smaller when needed. As she moved past them, she caught a glimpse of papers on the van's seat forms, stamped and signed names she did not recognize. One word stayed with her delivery. She reached the clinic entrance just as the men fell silent. She felt their attention on her back, heavy and searching. When she looked over her shoulder, one of them was watching her closely, his expression unreadable. Her pulse quickened. She turned away and entered the clinic, heart racing. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and fatigue. A receptionist listened to Ifeoma's request and shook her head apologetically. "We're not hiring today," she said. "Leave your name." Ifeoma wrote it carefully, her handwriting neat despite her nerves. When she stepped back outside, the van was gone. Relief washed over her, followed by confusion. Why had that moment felt so significant? She told herself she was imagining things. Hunger and fear could turn shadows into threats. The afternoon passed in a blur of walking and waiting. By the time the sun dipped lower, her optimism had thinned to a fragile thread. She considered leaving the area, entirely returning to the bus park where at least she knew how to disappear. As she debated, her phone, an old device with a cracked screen, buzzed. A message from Mama Halima. "Did you find anything?" "Not yet," Ifeoma replied, "but thank you." She wandered toward the bus park, her mind replaying the argument she had overheard. The words looped, gaining weight with each repetition. Numbers, deliveries, someone will pay. She did not understand them, but she understood the tone. It was the sound of consequences being discussed by people who expected to avoid them. As dusk settled, Ifeoma found a bench near the park and sat watching the steady churn of arrivals and departures. People carried bags, children hopes. Everyone seemed to be going somewhere. She felt suspended, as if her life had paused on an unseen hinge. A group of men passed nearby, laughing loudly. One of them glanced at her and said something under his breath. The others laughed harder. Ifeoma stared straight ahead, refusing to react. She had learned that attention could be dangerous. Her phone buzzed again. This time the message was from an unknown number. "You were near the clinic today," it read. Her breath caught. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering. She did not reply. Seconds passed. Another message appeared. "Be careful where you walk." Panic surged, swift and uninvited. She stood abruptly, scanning the crowd. Everyone looked the same, busy, indifferent, unknowable. She turned in a slow circle, her heart pounding. Was she being watched? Had she imagined the message? She slipped the phone into her pocket, her hands trembling. The sensible thing would have been to leave the city that night, to board a bus heading anywhere else and start again under a different sky. The thought tempted her, but she had no money, no destination, and a stubborn resolve that surprised her. Running had not saved her before. She returned to the kiosks after dark, choosing a spot that felt marginally safer. As she lay awake, the city's noise pressed in around her. She thought of Mama Halima's warning of the men by the van, of the message that had found her without explanation. She wondered how something she barely understood could already be closing in. Across the city, conversations continued without her. Plans adjusted. Names were considered. The shape of a story was forming, and Ifeoma's name hovered near its edge, uninvited, unprotected. She slept lightly, waking at every sound. In her dreams, doors closed and numbers floated like birds she could not catch. When dawn finally broke, she rose with a quiet certainty she could not explain. She had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the city would not forget it. Kwame Mensah did not raise his voice when the numbers failed to make sense. He never did. He simply leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, and read the report again, slowly, carefully, as if the truth might reveal itself through patience alone. From the 42nd floor, the city looked orderly. Roads cut clean lines through neighborhoods. Traffic flowed in predictable pulses. Order was comforting. Order suggested control. Kwame had built his career on the belief that systems, when designed honestly, would correct themselves. The spreadsheet on his screen disagreed. It was a routine review inventory movement across regional clinics and partner facilities. Nothing dramatic. Yet a quiet pattern repeated itself. Small discrepancies, always rounded, always explained away as logistics variants. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they formed a rhythm Kwame could not ignore. He called in Mrs. Linda Okafor, the head of human resources, a woman known for her discretion. "Do you see it?" he asked, turning the screen toward her. She adjusted her glasses, scanning the columns. "The numbers are tidy," she said after a moment. "Too tidy." Kwame nodded. "That's what troubles me." Before they could continue the board meeting, reminder chimed. Kwame closed the file without saving notes. Some conversations were better had in silence. The boardroom filled quickly. Polished shoes, tailored suits, practiced smiles. Mr. Tunde Adebayo arrived last as usual, greeting everyone with an easy confidence that bordered on charm. He took his seat across from Kwame, folding his hands. The meeting progressed smoothly. Profit margins, expansion timelines, press coverage. When logistics came up, Tunde spoke first, his tone reassuring. "Minor delays," he said. "Nothing outside normal operational noise." Kwame met his gaze. "Noise tends to repeat itself," he replied calmly. "Patterns do not." A flicker crossed Tunde's face, too quick for most to notice, but not for Kwame. "Are you suggesting mismanagement?" Tunde asked lightly. "I'm suggesting we look closer," Kwame said, quietly. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Someone cleared their throat. Tunde smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Of course," he said. "Transparency is our strength." After the meeting, Kwame remained behind, staring at the city again. He felt the familiar tension between responsibility and restraint. Accusations required proof. Proof required time. And time, he was beginning to suspect, was something someone else was running out of. Later that afternoon, Kwame walked through the Annex building without announcing himself. He preferred it that way. People behaved differently when they thought they were unobserved. He watched cleaners move methodically, their presence barely registered by those passing through. He watched managers glance at their phones, distracted. He listened. Near the service corridor, he saw a young woman kneeling to pick up scattered papers, her movements careful, almost apologetic. She wore a plain uniform, slightly too large sleeves rolled back. When she stood, she nearly collided with him. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, stepping back. Kwame recognized her immediately. Ifeoma Anozie. The name had stayed with him since the night he saw her outside the gate, since the way she had held herself as if expecting the world to strike again. "You dropped this," she added, holding out a keycard he hadn't noticed missing. Kwame took it surprised. "Thank you," he said. "Most people would have handed it to security." She shook her head. "It didn't feel right," she said simply. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Kwame saw exhaustion there, but also something steadier. Resolve, perhaps. He considered offering help, then stopped himself. Power complicated kindness. He had learned that the hard way. "If you need anything," he said instead, gesturing vaguely, "speak to your supervisor." She nodded, already stepping back. "Yes, sir." As she walked away, Kwame felt a familiar unease. Integrity, he thought, often appeared in places least rewarded by it. That evening, he requested access logs for the Annex storage rooms. The request raised eyebrows. No one questioned him aloud. Across the city, Ifeoma finished her shift with aching arms and a head full of questions. She had taken the job through an agency that promised little and warned much. "Keep your head down," they'd said. "Don't get involved." She intended to do exactly that. But whispers followed her. She heard them when she passed names, spoken softly, glances exchanged. The word loss surfaced again and again. Something was missing, and someone, she sensed, would be blamed. At a small cafe near the bus park, Kwame met Inspector Kofi Boateng under the pretense of an old friendship. They spoke casually, hands wrapped around cups they barely touched. "I need you to look into something," Kwame said. Unofficially, Kofi raised an eyebrow. "That usually means trouble." "It usually means prevention," Kwame replied. He slid a folded paper across the table. "Numbers don't lie. People do." Kofi glanced at the figures, his expression sharpening. "This isn't random," he said. "It's careful." "Careful enough to frame someone else?" Kwame asked. Kofi met his gaze. "That depends," he said. "Who's easiest to sacrifice?" The question lingered between them. That night, Kwame returned home later than usual. He replayed the day's moments, the boardroom tension, the keycard returned without expectation, the faint echo of warnings he couldn't quite place. He felt the weight of leadership settle heavier than before. Decisions he knew would soon demand more than observation. Ifeoma lay awake on her mat, the city humming around her. She thought of the man she had returned the keycard to his calm. His attention. She pushed the thought away. Hope, she reminded herself, could be dangerous. In different corners of the city, plans adjusted. Documents changed hands. A story was being prepared, one that required a name, a face, a convenient truth. And slowly, inevitably, the lines of suspicion began to converge. By the end of her first full week at the Annex, Ifeoma Anozie understood the unspoken rules. Speak only when spoken to. Clean what others ignored. Finish early, leave quietly. The agency supervisor had made it clear. Temporary workers were replaceable, and gratitude was expected to fill the gap where security should have been. The Annex building carried a nervous energy. Doors opened and closed with unnecessary force. Conversations stopped when certain people walked past. Ifeoma felt it most in the storage corridor, where boxes were stacked in careful rows and the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and cardboard. She cleaned there every evening, her mop tracing the same path while her eyes stayed lowered. It was there she heard the whispers. "Another delay," a man murmured once, thinking no one else was present. "Someone will take the fall," another replied. "Make sure it's not us." They didn't notice her at first. Cleaners rarely existed to those who didn't need them. Ifeoma moved slowly, deliberately, as if the rhythm of her work might shield her from attention. She told herself the words meant nothing. Offices always had problems. People always complained. But the feeling persisted, an invisible pressure that followed her down hallways and lingered near locked doors. At lunch, she sat alone on the steps outside, eating the bread Mama Halima had wrapped for her that morning. A group of permanent staff passed by laughing. One of them glanced at Ifeoma's uniform and smirked. "These agency girls," she said loudly. "They come and go. You never really know them." Another laughed. "You know enough." Ifeoma stared at her hands until the voices faded. She reminded herself that work was work. Dignity came from doing it well, even when no one acknowledged it. Inside, Mrs. Linda Okafor watched the Annex operations with careful neutrality. Complaints had begun to reach her desk: minor inventory inconsistencies, missing supplies, unusual access logs. None of it was enough to justify alarm, but together they unsettled her. She had learned long ago that trouble rarely announced itself loudly. She requested a quiet review of staff assignments. Names scrolled past: permanent employees, contractors, temporary hires. One name appeared more often than expected in the margins of reports, not because of wrongdoing, but proximity. Ifeoma Anozie. New. Temporary. Always present where questions later arose. Linda frowned. Correlation was not guilt, but it was often treated as such. That afternoon, Mr. Tunde Adebayo walked the Annex floor with practiced ease, greeting managers clapping shoulders. When he reached the storage corridor, his eyes swept the space, quickly calculating. They paused briefly on Ifeoma as she worked, then moved on. "Everything running smoothly?" he asked the supervisor. "Mostly," the man replied. "A few small issues." Tunde smiled. "Small issues grow when ignored," he said. "Let's be proactive." As he walked away, he glanced back once more at Ifeoma. The look was unreadable curiosity mixed with something sharper. That evening, a sealed box went missing. It was discovered during a routine check, its absence noted quietly at first. The contents were listed as medical supplies bound for partner clinics. Nothing dramatic, but the paperwork said it had arrived. The shelves said otherwise. The supervisor's voice tightened as he spoke to Linda on the phone. "We'll find it," he said. "Probably a misplacement." "Find it," Linda replied, "and document everything." By the next morning, the word missing had transformed into stolen. If Ifeoma learned of it the way she learned most things, through silence thickening around her. People stopped meeting her eyes. Conversations paused when she entered rooms. A security guard asked for her ID twice in 1 hour, his tone polite but firm. She approached the supervisor near the lockers. "Is there a problem?" she asked quietly. He avoided her gaze. "Just routine checks," he said. "Go back to work." Routine, she thought, did not feel like this. At midday, a man from the agency arrived unannounced. He watched her clean for several minutes without speaking. When she finally looked up, he nodded toward the office. "They want to ask you a few questions," he said. The office was small, windowless. Linda sat at the desk, a file open in front of her. The agency man leaned against the wall. Another supervisor stood near the door. Ifeoma, Linda began, her voice calm. "You worked the storage corridor last night." "Yes, ma'am," Ifeoma replied. "Did you notice anything unusual?" Ifeoma hesitated. The truth hovered at the edge of her tongue. Voices tension, the sense that something was wrong long before it was named. She remembered Mama Halima's warning. She remembered the message she had received days earlier. "Be careful where you walk." "No, ma'am," she said finally. "Nothing unusual." Linda studied her for a long moment. "You understand," she said, "that this is serious." "Yes, ma'am." The questions continued: where she had been, who she had seen, what time she had left. Ifeoma answered carefully, precisely. When it ended, she was dismissed with a nod. Outside, her legs felt weak. She leaned against the wall, breathing slowly. She told herself it was over. It had to be. But by evening, the agency called. "We've received a complaint," the man said flatly. "Until this is resolved, you're suspended." "Suspended," Ifeoma echoed. "For what?" "For investigation," he replied. "Don't make this harder." The line went dead. Across the city, Kwame Mensah read the incident report with growing unease. The missing box was minor, the response disproportionate. He requested footage from the corridor cameras. The file he received was incomplete. "Technical issue," the IT manager explained. "The feed cut out." "How convenient," Kwame said quietly. He scrolled through access logs instead. Names times codes. One entry stood out: an override issued during the window the box disappeared. It was authorized at a level far above Ifeoma's clearance. Kwame leaned back, exhaling slowly. He thought of the young woman returning his keycard without hesitation, of the way she had refused help out of caution rather than pride. He thought of how easily systems could turn on those least able to defend themselves. That night, Ifeoma packed her few belongings with care. Suspension, she knew, often became dismissal. Dismissal became a story that followed you everywhere. As she stepped outside, she felt eyes on her again. A car idled across the street. The engine hummed softly, waiting. Inside his office, Kwame stared at the city lights, a decision forming with the clarity of something long overdue. Someone was being positioned, and Ifeoma Anozie was standing exactly where they wanted her. The morning after her suspension, Ifeoma Anozie woke before dawn, not because she needed to, but because sleep had become a fragile thing. She lay still for a long moment, listening to the city gather itself, footsteps, distant engines, a vendor's call carried by the breeze. The mat beneath her felt thinner than ever, as if the ground itself were impatient with her presence. She folded her clothes and stepped outside. The bus park was already awake. People moved with purpose, their faces set toward destinations that waited for them. Ifeoma lingered at the edge, unsure where to place herself, now that time had opened wide and empty before her. She decided to walk. Walking had become her way of thinking. By mid-morning, she found herself near the Annex again, drawn by a mixture of habit and unfinished thoughts. She did not go inside. She stood across the street, watching the glass doors open and close, watching uniforms pass through, some familiar, some not. It felt like looking at a life she had already lived and lost. A black sedan pulled into the curb lane, smooth and unhurried. Ifeoma noticed it only because it stopped when it didn't need to. The window lowered. "Miss Anozie." She froze. The voice was calm, unfamiliar, but unmistakably hers by association. She turned slowly. Kwame Mensah sat in the back seat, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. He looked the same as he had in the corridor, composed, observant. The driver stared straight ahead, as if the street had nothing to do with them. "Yes, sir," Ifeoma said instinctively, formal. "Please," Kwame replied. "Just Kwame." She nodded, uncertain. "I heard about the suspension," he said. "I wanted to speak with you." Ifeoma's chest tightened. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said quickly, then stopped herself. She had learned how explanations could be twisted. "I mean, I know," Kwame said gently. "That's why I'm here." Silence stretched between them. Cars passed. A horn blared somewhere behind her. She waited for the catch, the condition that would turn this moment into another lesson. "I'm not offering you a favor," Kwame continued. "I'm asking a question. Will you have tea with me, somewhere public, somewhere you feel safe?" She hesitated, then nodded. Safety, she had learned, was often an illusion, but public places offered witnesses, and witnesses mattered. They walked to a small cafe nearby. Kwame chose a table by the window. Ifeoma sat opposite him, hands folded in her lap, eyes steady. She noticed small things, the way he thanked the server, the way he waited until she had a cup before touching his own. "I want to understand," Kwame said. "From your point of view." She took a breath. "I was hired to clean," she said. "I cleaned. I didn't touch anything that wasn't mine. When people spoke near me, I kept my head down." "Did you hear anything unusual?" he asked. Her pulse quickened. The question pressed against the warnings she carried. "Be careful where you walk." She weighed the risk of silence against the risk of truth. "I heard people arguing," she said slowly. "About deliveries, numbers. I didn't understand it all." Kwame nodded. "We're near the clinic road," she said. "Days before I started at the Annex." He made a small note on his phone, then set it aside. "Thank you for telling me." She studied his face. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Kwame met her gaze. "Because honesty deserves protection," he said, and because systems fail when they punish the wrong people. She absorbed that in silence. When they left the cafe, Kwame offered her a ride. She shook her head. "I'll walk," she said. "Thank you." He did not insist. "If you change your mind," he said, handing her a card, "call me." She took it, the weight of it, heavier than paper should be. Across the city, Mr. Tunde Adebayo reviewed reports with a frown that deepened by the minute. The suspension had been too clean too quick. It had been meant to settle nerves, to redirect attention. Instead, questions were spreading. "Find out who's been talking," he told his assistant, quietly. At the same time, Inspector Kofi Boateng stood in a dim records room, cross-referencing logs that didn't want to align. Overrides, timestamps, access codes issued and reissued within narrow windows. He circled one name in his notebook, not Ifeoma's, a supervisor's. Then another higher up, patterns he thought rarely lied. That evening, Ifeoma returned to Mama Halima's corner. She helped serve customers, her hands remembering the motions easily. Mama Halima watched her with a knowing look. "You met someone," Mama Halima said. Ifeoma smiled faintly. "How do you know you're standing straighter?" Mama Halima replied. "Careful. Hope can make you careless." "I know," Ifeoma said, "but it can also keep you standing." Later, as the street quieted, Ifeoma checked her phone. No new messages, no warnings. The absence felt suspicious in its own way. She walked back toward the kiosks, thinking of the cafe, of the way Kwame had listened without interrupting, of the word protection. She wondered what it cost to offer that and who paid when it failed. She reached her sleeping place and paused. A car idled at the far end of the row engine, low lights off. She felt the prickle of awareness rise along her arms. She turned casually, changing direction, letting a group pass between her and the shadowed vehicle. She walked 2 streets over before stopping, her heart pounding. When she looked back, the car was gone. Inside his apartment, Kwame reviewed footage again, frame by frame. He saw cleaners pass managers, linger doors open with the wrong codes. He saw the absence where images should have been. He called Kofi. "It's worse than I thought," he said. "Then it's closer to the surface," Kofi replied. "And that makes it dangerous." Kwame ended the call and stared out at the city. He thought of the gate closing behind Ifeoma, of how easily a life could be pushed to the margins. He made a decision that would pull threads too tightly for some. The next move he knew would expose intentions, and the people who needed a scapegoat would not wait patiently. The call came just after noon, when the city's heat pressed down like a held breath. Ifeoma Anozie was helping Mama Halima wipe down the cart, the metal still warm from the morning rush, when her phone buzzed in her palm, an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, then answered. "Is this Ifeoma Anozie?" The voice was clipped official. "Yes," she said. "This is the agency. You're required to report to the Annex immediately. Security will meet you at the gate." "For what?" Ifeoma asked her, throat tightening. "There's been a development," the man replied. "Don't be late." The line went dead. Mama Halima watched her face. "What is it?" she asked. "They want me back," Ifeoma said. The words felt wrong in her mouth. Not relief, something heavier. Security. Mama Halima's hands stilled. "Go carefully," she said, "and don't walk alone." Ifeoma nodded, though she knew she would. She tucked Kwame Mensah's card into her pocket, a small reassurance she tried not to lean on. Then she started walking. The Annex looked the same from the outside glass, reflecting sky guards standing in practiced stillness. Inside, it felt different, quieter. Eyes followed her as she passed through the lobby. A guard gestured toward a side corridor instead of the main office. 2 men waited in a small room with no windows. A folder lay open on the table. Mrs. Linda Okafor stood near the wall, her expression careful, restrained. The agency supervisor leaned against the doorframe. Arms crossed. Ifeoma Linda said, "Please sit." She did. The first man slid the folder toward her. Photographs, inventory lists. A printed access log with her name highlighted in yellow. "These supplies were removed during your shift," he said. "The timing matches your access." Ifeoma stared at the pages. "I didn't take anything," she said. "I couldn't even save it," the agency man cut in. "We've reviewed the footage." "What footage?" Ifeoma asked. "You said the cameras. The relevant sections are unavailable," the man replied. "But patterns don't lie." Ifeoma's hands trembled. She folded them tightly in her lap. "Patterns can be wrong," she said. "Please, check the codes. I don't have clearance." Linda shifted her weight. "We did check," she said quietly. "And there was an override." "Not mine," Ifeoma said. The words came faster now, urgency breaking through caution. "Someone else." A knock interrupted her. The door opened and Mr. Tunde Adebayo stepped in with an easy smile that did not belong to the room. "Apologies," he said. "I heard there was some confusion." The atmosphere changed instantly. The men straightened. Linda inclined her head. Tunde glanced at the folder, then at Ifeoma. "This is unfortunate," he said. "Very unfortunate. But we must protect the company." "I didn't steal anything," Ifeoma said, meeting his gaze. Tunde's smile softened, sympathetic. "I believe you believe that," he said. "But belief isn't evidence." The agency man cleared his throat. "Given the circumstances," he said, "we're terminating the contract effective immediately. Security will escort you out." The words landed like a blow. Ifeoma stood her knees unsteady. "You can't do this," she said. "You haven't proven enough," Tunde said gently. "We'll handle the rest." Security appeared at the door. Linda looked away. As Ifeoma was led through the corridor, conversations stopped. Faces turned. Whispers followed. She kept her head up each step an effort. In the lobby, someone lifted a phone. Another murmured her name. Outside, sunlight felt harsh, exposing. The guards released her at the gate without a word. Across the street, a small crowd had gathered, vendors, passers-by, people who recognized drama when they saw it. A man spoke loudly into his phone. "They caught her," he said. "The cleaner." The word stuck, cleaner, as if that explained everything. Ifeoma walked until the noise fell behind her. Her chest burned. She dialed Kwame's number, then stopped. She didn't know what she would say. She didn't want to sound desperate. She ended the call before it rang. By evening, the story had grown legs. Posts appeared online, grainy photos, captions heavy with certainty. Company theft exposed, cleaner arrested. Lies multiplied easily when they wore the shape of truth. Inspector Kofi Boateng read the reports with a tightening jaw. He called Kwame immediately. "They've moved," Kofi said. "Publicly." "I know," Kwame replied. He was already in his car. "Meet me at the Annex." Inside the building, Kwame walked past security without stopping. He entered the boardroom to find Tunde standing at the window, phone to his ear. The call ended as Kwame approached. "You dismissed her," Kwame said, his voice even. "For the good of the company," Tunde replied. "Perception matters. So does truth," Kwame said. He placed a folder on the table. "The override code belongs to your department." Tunde's expression did not change. "Coincidence?" "Then explain the bank transfers," Kwame said. "The ones routed through a shell account." For the first time, Tunde's eyes hardened. "You're overreaching." "I'm protecting this company from a scandal you created," Kwame said, "and from destroying an innocent life." Tunde stepped closer. "Careful," he said softly. "You don't know how deep this goes." Kwame met his gaze. "I intend to." Night fell early for Ifeoma. She returned to the kiosks, the familiar space offering little comfort now that shame pressed in with her hunger. She sat with her back against the metal shutters and stared at the ground. Mama Halima found her there wordless at first. Then she placed a bowl in front of her. "Eat," she said. "They think I stole." Ifeoma said, her voice breaking despite herself. "Everyone." Mama Halima sat beside her. "They think many things," she said. "Thinking is easy. Knowing is hard." A car slowed at the end of the row. Ifeoma felt it before she saw it. The engine idled. A door opened, then closed. Footsteps approached, stopped short. "Miss Anozie," a man said. "We have a few questions." Panic surged. She stood backing away. Mama Halima rose with her. "Who are you?" Mama Halima demanded. The man flashed a badge. "Security consultant," he said. "Voluntary conversation." Ifeoma shook her head. "I want a lawyer," she said, surprising herself. The man smiled thinly. "That won't be necessary," he said, "if you cooperate." Headlights flared behind him. A second car pulled in, black and unmistakable. The door opened. Kwame stepped out. "That will be necessary," Kwame said calmly. "And this conversation is over." The man hesitated, then retreated without argument. Kwame turned to Ifeoma. "I'm sorry," he said. They moved faster than I expected. She looked at him, tears finally spilling. "What do I do now?" she asked. Kwame did not answer immediately. He glanced down the dark street, then back at her. "You stay visible," he said, "and you let me do my job." In the distance, engines started. Somewhere else, plans adjusted again. The accusation had been made, and it was only the beginning. The night swallowed the kiosks in a hush that felt unnatural, as if the city itself were holding its breath. After the men left and the black car disappeared down the road, Ifeoma Anozie remained standing. Her body tense, her thoughts racing faster than she could order them. The accusation had escaped the walls of the Annex and grown teeth. It now had a face, a story, and an audience. Kwame waited until Mama Halima stepped away to pack her cart before speaking again. "You're not safe here tonight," he said quietly. Ifeoma wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't have anywhere else," she replied. "You do," he said, "for now." He did not offer explanations that sounded like promises. He offered options, simple, careful, grounded in reality. A small serviced apartment near the clinic road. Temporary. No company logos. No staff who would recognize her name. "You decide," he said. "I won't force anything." She searched his face for the trap she had learned to expect. She found none, only resolve. And something else. She couldn't quite name, an insistence that truth mattered, even when it was inconvenient. "I'll go," she said at last. They drove in silence, the city's lights blurring past. Ifeoma stared out the window, her reflection layered over passing streets. She thought of Auntie Nkiru's voice, sharp with certainty, of the phones lifted to record her exit, of the word cleaner spoken as judgment. Shame pressed against her chest, heavy and hot. The apartment was modest and clean. Kwame handed her a key and a prepaid phone. "If anyone contacts you, don't respond," he said. "Call me or Inspector Boateng. Any time." She nodded, exhaustion finally catching up to her. When he left, the quiet felt overwhelming. She sat on the bedshoes, still on, and let herself breathe. Sleep came in fragments. She dreamed of doors closing, of numbers spilling from boxes, of hands reaching for her and stopping just short. When she woke, dawn filtered through thin curtains, gentle and unassuming. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the weight returned. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Your aunt has spoken." The words sent a chill through her. A second message followed a link to a short video already spreading online. Ifeoma pressed play with shaking fingers. Auntie Nkiru stood in front of a gate. Ifeoma recognized all too well. Her voice was loud, practiced. She spoke of betrayal, of stolen money, of the burden she had carried out of kindness. She cried at the right moments. She named Ifeoma without hesitation. Ifeoma closed her eyes. The betrayal cut deeper than the accusation itself. Family, she had once believed, would not lie like this. She dialed Kwame immediately. "She's telling them everything," Ifeoma said, her voice unsteady, "or what she wants them to believe." "I know," Kwame replied. "It confirms what we suspected." Later that morning, Inspector Kofi Boateng arrived with a paper bag of pastries and a seriousness that filled the room. "Public statements escalate things," he said. "They also leave trails." He laid out what he had learned so far. Bank records routed through, layered accounts access, overrides issued by mid-level supervisors who answered to higher authority, missing footage that disappeared only when it mattered. "Someone needed a story the public would accept," he said. "Your aunt made it personal." Ifeoma listened, anger and grief knotting together. "She needed money," she said quietly. "She always did. She used to say I owed her for keeping me." Kofi nodded. "Debt makes people do things they later call necessity." Across the city, Auntie Nkiru sat in her living room phone, buzzing constantly with messages of sympathy and praise. Neighbors brought food. A local blogger asked for an interview. She accepted with a practiced sigh. "I only want justice," she said, hands clasped. I tried to raise her right. In the Annex, Mr. Tunde Adebayo watched the coverage with satisfaction that barely hid his impatience. "Good," he murmured. "Let it burn." But cracks were forming. Linda Okafor requested a private meeting with Kwame. Her voice was tight. "We're losing control of the narrative," she said. "And I don't like where it's pointing." Kwame slid a set of documents across the table. "It's pointing where it belongs." Linda scanned the pages, her face draining of color. "This will blow back on us. It will cleanse us," Kwame replied, "if we let it." That afternoon, Ifeoma ventured out only to the small clinic nearby, escorted quietly. She helped organize supplies, keeping her head down. It was there she met Zanele Mkwaze and her son, Sifo, again. Sifo's breathing was labored, his small chest rising with effort. "You came back," Zanele said softly. "I needed to be useful," Ifeoma replied. Zanele squeezed her hand. "You already are." The kindness steadied her. For an hour, the noise outside receded. She read to Sifo, her voice low and careful. When he smiled, something in her chest loosened, but safety was temporary. As evening fell, a knock sounded at the apartment door. Ifeoma froze. She checked the peephole, two men, unfamiliar, one holding a folder. "Ms. Anozie," a voice called. "We're here to clear a few things up." She did not open the door. She called Kwame. They found the place, she whispered. "Don't move," he said. "I'm on my way." The men knocked again, harder this time. "We can make this easier," one said. "Your aunt is worried." Ifeoma backed away, heart pounding. The lock held. Sirens wailed in the distance, closer than before. The men exchanged glances and retreated down the stairs, just as Kwame and Kofi arrived, their car lights flooding the street. Inside, Kofi examined the doorframe. "They're getting bolder," he said, "which means they're getting desperate." Kwame turned to Ifeoma. "We need to accelerate," he said. "Public exposure, full audit, board action." And my Aunt Ifeoma asked. Kofi met her eyes. She'll have to answer for what she said. That night, Ifeoma sat on the edge of the bed, the city humming beyond the window. She thought of the girl she had been quiet, compliant, hoping obedience would buy love. She thought of the woman she was becoming, visible, accused, refusing to disappear. Her phone buzzed again. A new message, this time from Mama Halima. "Hold steady. Truth walks slower, but it arrives." Ifeoma breathed in, then out. Somewhere documents were being prepared. Somewhere else, lies were tightening their grip. She felt the ground shift again, but this time she was standing. The family had turned against her. Now the world would decide whether it believed them. By the time dawn broke, the story had hardened into something heavier than rumor. It was printed, now headlines clipped and shared radio voices, repeating the same phrases, until they sounded like facts. Cleaner, linked to supply theft. Family confirms pattern of deceit. Each repetition pressed the lie deeper into the city's memory. Ifeoma Anozie read none of it. Kwame had advised her not to. "You can't outrun a story by chasing it," he said. "You outlast it by building something stronger." She tried to believe him. She folded laundry in the small apartment-lined shoes beneath the bed. Made tea she barely drank. Control, however small, steadied her hands. Inspector Kofi Boateng arrived mid-morning with updates that felt like a double-edged blade. "The bank trail is clearer," he said, spreading papers across the table. "Shell accounts feeding into a private logistics firm. The firm answers to a holding company with friendly faces." "Friendly faces?" Ifeoma asked. Kofi nodded. "People the public already trusts. That's why this works." Kwame paced near the window phone, pressed to his ear as he coordinated audits and board requests. Every call ended the same way with resistance. Process, they said. Time, they said. Time was the currency the guilty preferred. Across the city, Mr. Tunde Adebayo convened a quiet meeting in a glass-walled office. His tone was measured, his instructions precise. "We keep the focus narrow," he said. "One person, one narrative. Anything broader muddies the water." A manager shifted uncomfortably. "The audits will find what we allow them to find." Tunde interrupted. "And if they don't, we adjust." He left the meeting satisfied. Momentum, he believed, was on his side. For Ifeoma, momentum felt like gravity. She ventured out only with an escort, the clinic becoming her small island of usefulness. Zanele greeted her each day with the same tired smile, Sipho's breathing, a fragile rhythm she learned to anticipate. Ifeoma read to him. Cleaned surfaces held hands when fear crept in. In that space, labels fell away. She was not a thief. She was simply present. Yet even there, whispers followed. A volunteer avoided her gaze. A passerby pointed, then turned away. Zanele noticed and bristled. "They don't know you," she said. "They think they do," Ifeoma replied. One afternoon, a nurse pulled Zanele aside. "Be careful," she whispered. "People talk." Zanele straightened. "Let them," she said. "Truth doesn't need permission." Still the pressure mounted. The apartment received a notice slipped under the door. Anonymous typed, "Leave the city. This ends badly for you." Ifeoma showed it to Kwame without comment. "They want you gone," he said. "That's telling. Maybe I should go," Ifeoma said quietly. "I'm tired of being the reason doors close." Kwame met her eyes. "You're not the reason," he said. "You're the excuse." Kofi supported him. "Running validates their story," he said. "Staying forces answers." That night, Ifeoma dreamed of buses again. Destinations scrolling past, names blurring. She woke with the old instinct tugging at her disappear, survive. Start over. But when she rose, she did not pack. She made tea and waited for daylight. The next morning brought a development no one expected. A junior accountant, pale and shaking, contacted Kofi through a third party. "I can't keep this," the message read. "I have copies." They met in a public library, sunlight cutting clean lines across long tables. The accountant slid a flash drive across with trembling fingers. "They told me it was normal," he said. "Adjustments, timing. Then they asked me to alter a date." Kofi nodded. "And you didn't." "I tried," the man admitted. But it wouldn't reconcile. The files were damning delivery receipts mismatched with warehouse logs, overrides tied to specific managers' approvals that traced upward. Names clustered around a familiar center. Kwame exhaled slowly when Kofi shared the summary. "This gets us closer," he said. "But it won't survive daylight unless we protect the source." Protection was becoming a pattern, fragile people shielded against powerful machinery. It was exhausting, necessary work. As preparations accelerated, the city grew louder. A morning show invited Auntie Nkiru back for a follow-up. She arrived with documents she claimed proved her case, old receipts, handwritten notes. "I didn't want to do this," she said, voice quavering. "But the truth matters." Ifeoma watched the clip later, unable to stop herself. The woman on the screen felt like a stranger wearing her aunt's face. Rage flared, then grief. She turned the phone off. "Family can hurt us more than enemies," Kofi said gently. "They know where to aim." In the afternoon, a car tailed Ifeoma and her escort from the clinic. It kept its distance unmarked. When they changed routes, it followed. Kwame was on the phone, instantly redirecting them to a police station. The car peeled away at the last turn. "They're testing boundaries," Kofi said later, "seeing how far they can go." The answer, Ifeoma realized, was farther than she had imagined. By evening, Kwame convened a private meeting with select board members willing to listen. He presented the files methodically, refusing to dramatize. "We have a choice," he said. "Contain this and destroy a life, or confront it and rebuild trust." A woman at the table spoke first. "Public exposure will be brutal." Kwame nodded. "So will silence." When the meeting ended without consensus, he felt the familiar frustration of leadership, the knowledge that right action often lost to comfortable delay. He stepped outside city air, cool against his face, and called Ifeoma. "They're stalling," he said. She closed her eyes. "Then we don't," she replied. The certainty in her own voice surprised her. Later that night, Mama Halima called. "They came asking questions," she said. "About you." "I'm sorry," Ifeoma said. Mama Halima laughed softly. "Don't be. It means you matter." The next day, Kofi secured a warrant for deeper access, citing risk of evidence tampering. It was a narrow window, one that would slam shut if they hesitated. Teams moved quietly, copying files, sealing rooms, cataloging devices. Word leaked anyway. It always did. Tund learned of the warrant from a trusted contact. His smile did not falter, but his hands clenched. So he murmured. "They want daylight." He placed a call. "Activate the backup," he said, "and prepare the witness." By nightfall, Ifeoma's name trended again, this time alongside speculation. New evidence. Board divided. The city leaned forward, hungry for resolution. Ifeoma sat at the small table phone, face down. She thought of leaving one last time, of buses and quiet anonymity. Then she thought of Sifo's smile, of Mama Halima's steady hands, of the accountant's fear, of Kwame's insistence that systems could be corrected. She stayed. Outside, engines idled, papers changed hands, doors opened. Hope dipped low, but it did not disappear. The clinic at night was a different world. The daytime bustle gave way to a softer rhythm, monitors, humming footsteps, measured voices lowered as if volume alone might disturb fragile recoveries. Ifeoma Anozie learned this rhythm quickly. She wiped down counters with deliberate care, replaced empty water cups, and paused when nurses passed, letting them set the pace. It felt good to be useful in a place where usefulness wasn't a disguise for blame. Zanele Mkaize worked the night shift when she could. She moved through the ward with practiced efficiency. Her shoulders tense with exhaustion, she refused to show her son. Sifo lay curled on his side, thin arms tucked close, breath shallow but steady. Ifeoma took a seat beside him and read softly from a worn book the clinic kept for children. Sifo's eyes followed her voice, not every word, but the calm between them. "You don't have to stay so late," Zanele whispered once. "I want to," Ifeoma replied. "It helps me remember who I am." That was the truth. Here, no one asked her to explain herself. No one cared about headlines. When Sifo slept, Zanele spoke of small hopes, an appointment scheduled, a test result that wasn't as bad as feared. Ifeoma listened. Listening had always been her strength. Outside the clinic, the city continued its argument about her. Radio hosts debated guilt and innocence with the certainty of people far from consequence. Online comments grew sharper, angrier. The lie had settled into a shape the public recognized, and recognition bred comfort. Kwame Mensah refused comfort. He spent his days in meetings that ended in partial agreements and nights on calls that promised progress and delivered delays. Each step forward exposed another place to be blocked. He kept his voice calm and his notes meticulous because anger was the luxury of those without responsibility. Inspector Kofi Boateng, meanwhile, coordinated quietly. Warrants took time. Time invited interference. He shuffled teams, rotated routes, changed meeting points. Protection was a moving target. One evening, as Ifeoma stepped out of the clinic, she noticed a car parked too long near the entrance. Its windows were tinted, the engine idled. She slowed, adjusting her bag. The driver's door did not open. The car did not move. "Don't look," Zanele murmured, her hand tightening on Ifeoma's sleeve. "Come with me." They walked together toward the side street where the lights were brighter. The car waited, then rolled forward, stopping again at a distance. Ifeoma's heart beat faster, but she kept her stride even. Fear, she had learned, thrived on reaction. At the apartment, she found another message slipped under the door. "You're still here." Nothing else. No signature. It felt like a test. She called Kwame immediately. "They're watching," she said. "I know," he replied. "We're close enough to make them nervous." Closeness had a cost. The next morning, the junior accountant who had come forward withdrew his statement through counsel. "Family concerns," the message read. Kofi's jaw tightened when he read it. "They got to him," he said. "Do we still have the files?" Ifeoma asked. "Yes," Kofi said. "But witnesses turn documents into stories people believe." Belief again. It always returned to belief. That afternoon, Kwame requested a meeting with Ifeoma, not as an executive, but as a person who needed her consent. They sat in the apartment's small living room, sunlight cutting through dust motes. "If we proceed publicly," he said, "they will try to break you. Not just legally, personally." Ifeoma nodded. "They already have." "More," he said gently. "Your aunt. Old stories. Anything to muddy the water." Ifeoma folded her hands. She thought of Auntie Nkiru's eyes on camera, the practiced sorrow. "If I stay silent," she said, "they'll say it proves their case." Kwame nodded. "If you speak, they'll try to tear you apart." She looked up. "Then I speak." That night she dreamed of standing in a room that kept changing shape, sometimes a boardroom, sometimes her aunt's living room, sometimes the clinic. Each time she opened her mouth, the walls leaned closer. Each time she stayed standing. The next day brought a small mercy. Saifo's test results improved. Zanele cried quietly in the hallway, relief loosening her shoulders for the first time in weeks. Ifeoma hugged her without thinking. Healing, she realized, did not announce itself. It arrived softly, then stayed. News broke in the afternoon. The board would convene an emergency session to address operational irregularities. The language was careful, but the timing spoke loudly. Phones buzzed. The city leaned forward again. Tunde Adebayo watched the announcement with narrowed eyes. He placed a call to Auntie Nkiru. "You did well," he said. "Be ready to clarify a few points if asked." "Clarify?" she asked, nervousness creeping in. "Reinforce," he corrected. "Consistency is everything." As evening fell, Ifeoma received a call from a blocked number. She did not answer. The voicemail arrived anyway. "You could end this," a man said calmly. "Leave the city. Let the story fade." She deleted it without replying. At the clinic, a volunteer she hadn't met before approached her. "I read about you," the woman said. "I don't believe it." She pressed a small paper bag into Ifeoma's hands. "Breadfruit." "For strength," she added, embarrassed. Ifeoma thanked her, surprised by the tears that followed. Kindness, she had learned, could arrive unexpectedly, and it mattered more than the loudest accusations. That night, Kwame and Kofi finalized their plan. Evidence would be presented, access logs projected, transfers traced, and Ifeoma would speak not to defend herself alone, but to anchor the truth in lived experience. Facts persuade minds, Kofi said. People persuade hearts. Sleep came late. When it did, Ifeoma woke with resolve, steadying her breath. She dressed carefully, choosing clothes that felt like herself, simple, clean, unadorned. She looked at her reflection and practiced standing still. Outside, engines started, cameras were tested, statements rehearsed. The city prepared to decide what it would believe next. Ifeoma stepped into the morning with a quiet promise to herself. Whatever happened, she would not disappear. The morning of the emergency board session arrived with a deceptive calm. The sky was clear, the air cool enough to invite optimism. Ifeoma Anozie noticed the quiet. First, the way traffic flowed without impatience, the way vendors set out their goods as if the city were not preparing to hold its breath. Calm, she had learned, often preceded impact. Kwame Mensah insisted on moving early. Crowds form around certainty, he said as they left the apartment. We'll arrive before they do. The building's entrance buzzed with restrained activity. Security had doubled. Assistants whispered into headsets. A small cluster of journalists waited behind a cordon, their lenses already hungry. Ifeoma felt their attention like heat on her skin, even though they didn't yet know she was there. Inside the boardroom gleamed glass-wood precision. Seats filled quickly. Faces carried variations of concern, calculation, fatigue. Mr. Tunde Adebayo took his place with an ease that suggested ownership. He nodded at Kwame, the gesture friendly, the eyes cold. Kwame stood. He did not raise his voice. He presented the audit's opening summary with a restraint that demanded attention. We identified inconsistencies across deliveries, approvals, and access logs, he said. What appeared minor formed a pattern. Screens lit up, tables aligned, dates marched in order. A line connected warehouse to clinic approval, to override to transfer. Murmurs rippled. Tund leaned back. Patterns require interpretation. He said mildly, we must be careful not to criminalize coincidence. Kwame nodded. Agreed. That's why we corroborated. He gestured to Kofi Boateng, who stepped forward with the assurance of a man used to rooms that doubted him. Overrides were issued using credentials tied to mid-level supervisors, Kofi said. Those supervisors reported upward to one department. Eyes shifted. Tunda smiled thinly. Departments don't steal, he said. People do. People with access, Kofi replied. And motive. The door opened. A late arrival, an external auditor, took a seat and plugged in a device. We recovered deleted metadata, she said. It confirms timing and authorization beyond the accused cleaner's clearance. The word cleaner hung there, ugly and revealing. Tunda's jaw tightened. You're still building this on the back of a temporary worker's proximity, he said. She was present. Kwame turned calm, unwavering. Presence is not permission, he said, and proximity is not guilt. A hand rose from the far end of the table. What about the family statements? A board member asked. The aunt's testimony. Kwame inhaled slowly. We invited Ms. Nkiru Anozie to speak, he said. A ripple of surprise. The door opened again. Auntie Nkiru entered, dressed carefully, eyes scanning the room. She carried a folder clutched too tightly. She sat when directed, lips pressed thin. Ms. Anozie, Kwame said, You alleged theft and coercion. Please explain the receipts you provided. She opened her folder, fingers trembling. I kept records, she said. She was troubled. Money went missing. Kofi leaned forward. These receipts, he said gently, predate the alleged theft by months. And this signature, He turned the screen. Matches a loan agreement you signed with a private logistics firm. Nkiru's face drained of color. I don't understand, she said. You do, Kofi replied. The deposits into your account coincide with the missing inventory. Silence pressed in. A board member exhaled sharply. Tunda rose halfway from his seat. This is inappropriate, he said. You're intimidating a witness. Kwame met his gaze. We're clarifying, he said. There's a difference. Nkiru's voice broke. I needed help, she said suddenly. They said it was legal. I didn't know who said, Kofi asked. She looked at Tunde. Just for a second. Long enough. Kwame turned to the final slide. We'll hear from Ms. Ifeoma Anozie. Now, he said. Ifeoma stood. The room felt larger, then smaller. She stepped forward, her hands steady despite the noise rushing in her ears. She did not begin with a defense. She began with facts, what she did, where she worked, what she could access, what she could not. She spoke of hearing arguments near the clinic road before she ever worked at the Annex. She spoke of being suspended without evidence, dismissed without proof. I am not asking you to like me, she said. I'm asking you to check the doors you accuse me of opening. She paused, then added quietly, and the ones you left open yourselves. The room shifted. Not applause, something deeper. Recognition. Tunde laughed once sharp. This is theater, he said. Sympathy dressed as evidence. Kofi nodded to the auditor. Then let the data speak, he said. The final files appeared, bank transfers looping through shells and landing in accounts tied to Tunde's network. Dates aligned. Approvals stacked. Overrides traced upward. Tunde's smile collapsed. This is fabricated, he said, voice rising. You're orchestrating a coup. Kwame's voice stayed level. We're restoring governance, he said. Security has been notified. As if on cue, officers entered. The room erupted, chairs scraping, voices overlapping. Tunde backed away, anger flashing. You think this ends here, he said to Kwame. You've made enemies. Kwame did not respond. Auntie Nkiru wept openly now, her folder slipping from her hands. I didn't mean for this, she said to no one in particular. Outside journalists surged as the doors opened. Statements flew, names trended. The city inhaled. In a quiet corridor, Ifeoma leaned against the wall, the aftermath washing over her in waves. Kwame joined her, careful not to crowd. You did well, he said. I told the truth, she replied. That was the hard part. Sirens sounded faintly below. Somewhere handcuffs closed. Somewhere else a lie unraveled. The building exhaled as the boardroom emptied. The narrative had shifted, not finished, but forced into daylight. Ifeoma straightened her shoulders, lighter than they had been in weeks. The city would argue again tonight. But for the first time, it would argue with facts. The first night after the boardroom confrontation did not bring relief. It brought silence, the kind that arrives when something large has fallen and the dust has not yet settled. Ifeoma Anozie returned to the apartment, escorted her body humming with delayed shock. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her hands, half expecting them to shake. They did not. Instead, a deep ache spread through her shoulders, the weight of weeks finally allowed to land. Outside, the city recalibrated. News tickers updated. Radio hosts softened their tone, replacing certainty with questions. Arrests pending, audit ongoing, company vows transparency. The words felt careful now, as if afraid of being wrong again. Kwame Mensah called late. Security has been increased, he said. Not just for you, for witnesses, staff, families. Thank you, Ifeoma replied. Gratitude felt complicated. She had learned that help often came with expectations. Kwame's did not. That more than anything steadied her. Inspector Kofi Boateng visited the next morning with a checklist and a warning. Exposure creates risk, he said. People who feel cornered don't behave predictably. Ifeoma nodded. I know. You shouldn't have to, he said, gentler than before. But you do. At the clinic, the mood shifted. Some volunteers avoided eye contact, unsure how to treat someone whose name had been everywhere. Others approached quietly, offering smiles that felt like apologies. Zanele met Ifeoma at the door and pulled her into a brief, fierce hug. I watched, Zanele said. You were brave. I was honest, Ifeoma replied. Brave came later. Sifo slept through their exchange, his breathing steadier than it had been in days. Ifeoma sat beside him, letting the hum of machines ground her. Healing, she realized, was not a moment. It was repetition. By afternoon, the phone calls began. Requests for statements, interviews, clarifications. Kwame filtered them all. Not yet, he said. Truth doesn't need to shout. The city disagreed. A crowd gathered outside the company headquarters cameras, lifted signs hastily written. Some demanded accountability. Others defended old narratives, unwilling to let go of the comfort blame had offered. Ifeoma watched from a distance on a muted screen, her chest tight. That evening, a call slipped past the filters. An unfamiliar voice, low and controlled. You've embarrassed powerful people, it said. This ends if you cooperate. Ifeoma did not respond. She ended the call and saved the number. Her hands shook this time. She breathed through it, slow and deliberate, the way Zanele had taught her. Kofi arrived within the hour. You did the right thing, he said after listening to the voicemail. They're testing you. Testing what Ifeoma asked. Whether you'll trade safety for silence. She shook her head. I won't. The test escalated the next day. A delivery arrived at the apartment, unmarked, unexpected. The guard downstairs called it in before allowing it up. Kofi insisted on inspecting it first. Inside the plain box sat nothing dangerous. Just documents, photocopies of old school records, medical forms, notes in Auntie Nkiru's handwriting. A message lay on top. We know you. Ifeoma's breath caught. Old vulnerabilities curated and weaponized. Kofi's expression hardened. This is intimidation, he said. And evidence. Kwame arrived soon after, anger flickering behind his calm. We'll move you, he said. Tonight. They relocated to a safer place, quieter, with layers of security. The move felt like another loss, another space surrendered. Ifeoma reminded herself it was temporary. At the clinic, Zanele noticed the absence immediately. She called. Are you okay? Yes, Ifeoma said. Just. Elsewhere. Wherever you are, Zanele replied. Sifo asked for you. The words pierced deeper than threats. Ifeoma promised to visit as soon as it was cleared. Meanwhile, the investigation accelerated. Subpoenas expanded. Phones were seized. Accounts frozen. The junior accountant who had withdrawn his statement reappeared through counsel, fear etched into every sentence. I couldn't sleep, he said. I want to fix it. Kofi nodded. You are. The city's tone shifted again. Commentators spoke of courage, of whistleblowers, of systems that failed the vulnerable. The same platforms that had once condemned, now reconsidered. The whiplash left Ifeoma dizzy. Late one night, exhaustion finally caught her. She slept deeply and woke to the sound of pounding. Not at the door. Below it. Voices rose. A crash echoed up the stairwell. Security radios crackled. Ifeoma sat bolt upright, heart hammering. Kofi's voice came through the door. Stay where you are. Footsteps thundered. A man shouted, angry, desperate. Another crash, then silence. When the door opened again, Kofi's face was grim. They tried to force entry, he said. Not smart, but revealing. What happened? Ifeoma asked. They ran, he said. Left a vehicle. It's tied to a shell company. Kwame arrived minutes later, eyes scanning the room. Then Ifeoma. I'm sorry, he said. This shouldn't be happening to you. She met his gaze. It's happening because it needs to stop, she said. The certainty in her own voice surprised her. The incident hardened resolve. Warrants expanded. Charges were prepared, and for the first time the threat felt like proof of progress, rather than retreat. The next day, Ifeoma returned to the clinic with clearance. Zanele met her with relief that loosened both their shoulders. Sifo smiled when he saw her, a small, luminous thing. Ifeoma sat and read, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath. Afterward, Zanele took her aside. "They offered to move us," she said. "Safer housing. Will you go?" Ifeoma asked. "Yes," Zanele said. "For him." Ifeoma nodded. Choices she knew were rarely simple. As evening fell, Kwame and Kofi reviewed the timeline one last time. "We're ready," Kofi said. "Charges will be announced." Kwame exhaled. "Then the noise will return." Ifeoma stood by the window watching lights bloom across the city. "Let it," she said. "I'm not afraid of noise anymore." She felt tired, bone deep, but also anchored. The attempt to silence her had failed. The threat had sharpened truth into something unignorable. Outside sirens rose not in pursuit of her, but of accountability. The city did not sleep. Neither did justice, and Ifeoma, who had been pushed to the margins, stood firm at the center of her own life. The city woke to sirens and statements. By mid-morning, official notices confirmed what many had suspected, but few dared to say aloud. Arrests were imminent, assets frozen, charges prepared. The language was careful, legal, dense, but the meaning was clear enough. The story had turned. Not finished, not resolved, but unmistakably redirected. For Ifeoma Anozie, the shift felt unreal. She moved through the morning as if underwater, the sounds of the city muted by the steady beat of her own pulse. Kwame Mensah checked in often brief calls, precise updates. Inspector Kofi Boateng coordinated movements and schedules with a protective thoroughness that felt both reassuring and heavy. "You'll be asked to testify again," Kofi said during a late breakfast meeting. "Not today. Soon." Ifeoma nodded. "I'm ready." She surprised herself by meaning it. The clinic became her anchor. Zanele had moved into safer housing, but Sifo's appointments continued. Ifeoma met them there, the familiar corridors easing the tension she carried. Sifo's condition had stabilized. His smile returned more easily, now less guarded. Ifeoma read to him, tracing words with her finger, letting the story carry them both somewhere gentler. "You're calmer," Zanele observed. "I'm clearer," Ifeoma replied. "There's a difference." Clarity arrived with costs. The calls resumed, some supportive, others probing. A producer requested an interview to humanize the issue. A columnist asked for a quote. Kwame declined them all on her behalf. "When we speak," he said, "it will be on your terms." That afternoon, a knock sounded at the apartment door. This time there was no panic. Kofi checked the hallway camera and opened it himself. Auntie Nkiru stood there, smaller than Ifeoma remembered her composure, frayed. She carried no folder now, only her hands wringing each other. "I need to talk," Nkiru said, her voice thin. Ifeoma's chest tightened. She nodded. They sat across from each other at the small table. Silence stretched thick with history. Nkiru spoke first. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said. "They said it was paperwork, that it would help." "You said I stole," Ifeoma replied. Her voice was steady, and that steadiness felt like a victory of its own. Nkiru's eyes filled. "I was afraid," she said. "Afraid of debts, afraid of losing the house." "You were afraid," Ifeoma said softly. "So you chose me." The words landed without accusation. That hurt more. Nkiru nodded, tears spilling. "I'm sorry." Ifeoma closed her eyes. She thought of the gate closing, of nights spent on concrete, of names whispered with certainty. Forgiveness, she knew, was not a switch you flipped because it felt noble. "I won't protect you from the consequences," Ifeoma said at last. "But I won't lie about what you did." Nkiru bowed her head. "That's fair." When she left, Ifeoma felt neither lighter nor heavier, only resolved. Boundaries, she realized, were a kind of mercy. The following days blurred into preparation. Kofi walked Ifeoma through timelines, documents, questions, designed to confuse and distract. "Answer what you know," he said. "Say you don't know when you don't." Silence can be honest. Kwame handled the board, the lawyers, the fallout. Some members apologized privately. Others remained distant, calculating. Trust, once broken, took time to rebuild, and sometimes never did. On the eve of the hearing, Ifeoma stood alone in the apartment, rehearsing nothing. She chose clothes that felt like herself. Simple, clean, unremarkable. She wanted no costume, no armor. Sleep came late. When it did, it carried her back through memory. The mat by the kitchen. The sound of pots, the way gratitude had been demanded like rent. She woke before dawn, heart steady. The courthouse steps were crowded. Cameras angled for faces' reactions. Kofi led her inside through a quieter entrance. The room smelled of paper and old wood. The air charged with anticipation. Inside, names were read, charges stated. The machinery of justice moved with deliberate weight. Mr. Tunde Adebayo sat across the room, posture rigid, eyes hard. When he looked at Ifeoma, there was no apology, only calculation. Ifeoma took the stand. She spoke plainly, of what she cleaned, of what she could access, of what she heard before she ever worked at the Annex, of being suspended without evidence, dismissed without proof. She did not dramatize. She did not plead. When pressed, when questions sharpened to imply motive, she returned to facts. "I did not have the clearance. I did not authorize any overrides. I returned property when I found it." Each answer landed like a stone, placed carefully in a wall. Documents followed, timelines aligned, accounts traced. The narrative that had once condemned her now collapsed under its own weight. During a recess, Kwame found her in a quiet corridor. "No matter what happens," he said, "you've changed this." "I changed my part," she replied. The rest was already broken. The hearing stretched into the afternoon. When it ended for the day, the judge set dates, issued orders. Accountability had a schedule now. It felt strange, almost anticlimactic. Outside, the city roared. Reporters shouted questions. Ifeoma kept walking, her eyes forward. Zanele waited at the edge of the crowd, Sifo's hand tucked in hers. They hugged, brief and fierce. "You did it," Zanele whispered. "We did," Ifeoma replied. That night, exhaustion settled in layers. Ifeoma slept deeply, dreamless. When she woke, the city felt different. Not kinder, not gentler, but honest in a way it hadn't been before. Kwame called mid-morning. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what comes next for you. I want to work," Ifeoma said, "and learn. Not as a favor." "Good," he replied, "because what I'm offering isn't one." They met later that day, not in an office, but in a public space. He spoke of programs of training, of paid apprenticeships tied to real outcomes. "You decide," he said. "Always." Ifeoma considered it carefully. Choice mattered. Now. As evening fell, she walked the city streets alone, for the first time in weeks. No escort, no shadows. She passed the Annex without stopping. She passed the bus park and did not sit. She had been accused, hunted, nearly erased. She had stood anyway. Justice was not finished. Healing rarely was. But Ifeoma Anozie was no longer waiting for permission to live. The backlash came swiftly, like a tide that waited only for the moon to turn. By the third morning after the hearing, a new narrative surged across the city, louder, angrier, and more polished than the last. Headlines reframed facts as questions. Talk shows invited experts who spoke confidently about procedures they barely understood. A video surfaced, carefully edited, expertly timed, suggesting that evidence had been mishandled, that timelines were manipulated, that a power struggle within the company had used a vulnerable worker as a symbol. Ifeoma Anozie watched the first clip with a tightening chest. The second she turned away from. By the third, she reached for the phone and switched it off. "They're trying to muddy the water," Kofi said when he arrived, his expression grim. Last stand. Kwame paced the room, jaw set. "They're betting on fatigue," he said. "On the public, getting tired of complexity." Fatigue was real. It pressed into Ifeoma's bones, made every step feel heavier. She had expected relief after speaking her truth. Instead, the truth was being pulled apart, reassembled, and sold back to the city in pieces that no longer resembled her life. A summons arrived before noon, an emergency injunction hearing initiated by Tunde Adebayo's legal team, seeking to exclude key evidence on procedural grounds. If granted, it would stall the case indefinitely and reopen the door to the old accusation. "They want the clock," Kofi said, "and they want you silent." The courthouse filled again, this time with sharper edges. Cameras crowded the steps. Protest signs appeared, some demanding justice, others defending reputations. The city argued with itself in real time. Inside, the air felt tighter than before. The judge's expression was unreadable as motions were filed and countered. Lawyers spoke in rapid bursts, words stacked high and hollow. Technicalities took center stage. Process overshadowed people. When the opposing counsel rose, his tone was measured, his language surgical. He questioned the chain of custody. He questioned intent. He questioned the motivations of leadership changes and the credibility of witnesses who had recanted and returned. He did not mention Ifeoma by name at first. When he did, it was with calculated sympathy. A young woman, he said, caught between powerful forces. Ifeoma felt the room tilt. The phrase sounded kind. It was a cage. Kwame's attorney countered with calm precision, but the ground was shifting. The judge asked pointed questions. Doubt crept in, not about facts, but about appetite. How much truth would the system tolerate before choosing convenience? A recess was called. In the hallway, Kwame spoke quietly. "If this goes their way, it delays everything," he said. "They'll keep pressing until you're exhausted." Ifeoma closed her eyes. She thought of Zanele and Sifo, of Mama Halima's steady hands, of nights spent waiting for doors to open that never did. Exhaustion, she realized, was familiar. It had never stopped her before. "I want to speak," she said. Kofi looked at her sharply. "Not on the stand," he said. "They'll twist, not like that," she replied. "Outside." Kwame hesitated. "It will be public," he said, "and brutal." She nodded. "Then it will be honest." The press conference was unscheduled, unpolished, and unavoidable. Word spread quickly, faster than any statement could be prepared. Cameras repositioned, microphones clustered. The city leaned in. Ifeoma stepped forward without notes. She did not stand behind a podium. She stood where people could see her hands. "I'm not here to debate procedures," she began. Her voice was steady, not loud. "I'm here because my life became a technicality." Murmurs rippled. She continued. "I was accused because it was convenient. I was believed guilty because it was familiar. When I spoke, I was told my truth was symbolic. When evidence appeared, I was told it was political." She paused, meeting the eyes of the cameras. "I clean, I listen, I show up. I return what isn't mine. That's not a symbol, that's a life." Questions flew. She answered some, ignored others. When pressed about motives, she spoke plainly. "I want to work without fear. I want my name back. I want systems that don't crush the quietest person first." A reporter asked about her aunt. Ifeoma inhaled. "Family does not excuse harm," she said, "nor does harm erase responsibility." The conference ended as abruptly as it began. There was no flourish, no declaration of victory, only a truth released into open air. Inside the courthouse, the hearing resumed. The judge acknowledged the public interest, then did something unexpected. She denied the injunction. The court will not exclude evidence on grounds that risk silencing material truth, she said. Proceed. A collective breath released. Tunde's counsel objected, voice tight. The judge's gavel ended the attempt. Outside reactions split and surged. Some praised courage, others doubled down on doubt. But the delay they had sought was gone. That evening, threats returned quieter, more insidious. Anonymous messages, half-promises of exposure. Kofi logged them all. Desperation, he said. They're losing leverage. Kwame found Ifeoma on the apartment balcony, city lights spread beneath them. You didn't have to do that, he said. I did, she replied. For me. Silence settled, companionable, heavy with aftermath. He spoke again, carefully. When this ends, there will still be fallout, he said. For both of us. She nodded. I'm not afraid of beginnings anymore. The next day brought confirmation, additional charges approved. Co-conspirators named. Court dates set. The city's tone shifted again. Not celebratory, but sober. Accountability had weight. Zanelli called, voice bright with relief. Sifo asked if you're coming tonight. I am, Ifeoma said. I wouldn't miss it. At the clinic, Sifo smiled and held her hand. She read to him as she always had, her voice calm, grounded. The monitors hummed. The world for a moment narrowed to something manageable. When she left, she walked past a mirror in the hallway and paused. The woman looking back at her was tired. She was also unbroken. Outside, the city moved on, imperfect, impatient, alive. Justice had not arrived fully formed. It had arrived contested, argued, and hard-won. Ifeoma stepped into the evening. Knowing one thing with clarity, the last attempt to erase her had failed. The next step would finish what courage had begun. The verdict did not arrive with thunder. It came on a weekday morning, announced in a courtroom that smelled faintly of old paper and polish, spoken in a voice trained to be steady. The judge read through findings with deliberate care, facts aligned, chains established, responsibilities named. Each sentence landed with a quiet finality that did not need drama to be decisive. Mr. Tunde Adebayo was found culpable on multiple counts: fraud, conspiracy, obstruction. Co-conspirators followed their roles, clarified in language stripped of excuses. Accounts remained frozen, properties seized. The system, imperfect and slow, finally closed its grip. Ifeoma Anozie sat in the second row, hands folded, listening. She did not smile. She did not cry. She felt something deeper than relief. A release that settled into her chest like breath after a long submersion. When her name was spoken, it was not as an accusation, but as a finding, wrongfully accused. The words felt heavier than any insult she had carried. Outside, the city waited. Cameras clustered. Questions rose. Ifeoma stepped into the light and said only this: the truth stood. Let it keep standing. Then she walked away. The days that followed were quieter by necessity. Quiet allowed the body to catch up with the soul. Ifeoma returned to the clinic, not as a refuge, but as a choice. Zanelli met her with news that felt like sunlight. Sifo's treatment plan had advanced a slot, opened sooner than expected. We're hopeful, Zanelli said, tears shining. Hope, Ifeoma learned, grew stronger when shared. Kwame Mensah kept his distance publicly, intentionally. Privately, he called once the evening after the verdict. I'm sorry it took so much from you, he said. It gave something back, Ifeoma replied. My name. He told her about the company's reforms, new oversight, independent audits, training pathways tied to accountability. This can't be symbolic, he said. It has to be structural. She agreed. Symbols fade, she said. Structures stay. A week later, they met in a public library cafe, a place chosen for its ordinariness. Kwame spoke of a paid program, operations training, paired with education credits open to temporary workers who had been invisible to the company's ladders. No favors, he said. A door. Ifeoma considered it carefully. Choice. mattered now more than speed. "I'll try," she said, "on one condition." He raised an eyebrow. "That I can leave if it becomes a story about you," she said. "Not the work." Kwame smiled, not with charm but with respect. Agreed. Auntie Nkiru faced her own reckoning. The court ordered restitution and community service. The house she feared losing remained, but the debts were no longer secrets. She did not seek Ifeoma out again. When they crossed paths once months later, it was in a market aisle. They exchanged a nod. Nothing more, nothing less. Forgiveness. Ifeoma had learned did not require reunion. Mama Halima continued to sell rice and beans at the corner, refusing interviews with a laugh. "I feed people," she said. "That's my headline." Ifeoma visited often, sometimes helping serve, sometimes just listening. The bench near the cart became a place of grounding proof that ordinary kindness did not need recognition to matter. The city moved on. It always did. New scandals rose, old ones receded, but some changes lingered. Procedures tightened, voices included, assumptions questioned. Small shifts, perhaps, real ones. On her first day in the program, Ifeoma wore comfortable shoes and carried a notebook she had chosen herself. The work was demanding: logistics maps, process reviews, shadowing teams that once would not have learned her name. She asked questions. She wrote careful notes. She returned home tired in a way that felt earned. Kwame observed from a distance. When they spoke, it was about work, about ideas that could make systems kinder without weakening them. Trust grew slowly, deliberately, without declarations. It felt right to let it. One evening after a long shift, Ifeoma walked past the Annex without stopping. She crossed the street and kept going toward the bus park. She sat on a bench and watched departures, people carrying bags, Hope's children. She remembered thinking she might disappear into one of those buses. She smiled just a little. At the clinic, Sifo laughed for the first time in a way that filled the hallway. Zanele squeezed Ifeoma's hand, eyes wet. "You stayed," she said. "So did you," Ifeoma replied. Months passed. Training turned into responsibility. Responsibility into confidence. Confidence into choice. When an offer came full-time, fair pay, clear growth, Ifeoma accepted it without hesitation. Not because it redeemed the past, but because it honored the present. On a quiet afternoon, Kwame asked her to walk with him along a shaded street near the library. There were no cameras, no announcements. He spoke plainly. "I respect you," he said. "I don't want to rush what should be built." Ifeoma considered the city sounds around them, the ordinary music of living. "We can build," she said, slowly. That was enough. The story of the accused cleaner faded into archives and footnotes. The story of a woman who kept standing did not. It lived in choices, in systems, nudged toward fairness in a clinic hallway where a child breathed easier, in a corner where rice and beans were served without judgment. Ifeoma Anozie did not become a symbol. She became herself. And that, at last, was the life that changed everything. Life rarely changes in one loud moment. More often, it shifts because someone refuses to disappear when the world decides they are convenient to erase. Ifeoma's journey reminds us that injustice does not always wear the face of cruelty. Sometimes it hides behind procedure, respectability, and familiar stories that people are too tired to question. What saved her was not power, wealth, or perfect timing. It was her refusal to surrender her name, her dignity, and her sense of self when silence would have been easier. This story teaches us that being poor does not make someone disposable, and being quiet does not make someone weak. Systems fail most dangerously when they punish the least protected first. But systems can also be changed when truth is carried patiently, clearly, and without hatred. Ifeoma did not win because she shouted louder than others. She won because she stayed grounded in what she knew to be true and allowed her actions, consistency, and courage to speak over time. Another lesson lives in the people around her. Mama Halima's simple kindness, Zanele's loyalty, and even the slow accountability of institutions show us that healing is communal. No one survives injustice alone. Sometimes the smallest acts, a meal, a listening ear, a place to rest, become the anchors that keep a person standing long enough for justice to arrive. This story also reminds us that forgiveness does not mean forgetting, and healing does not require returning to harm. Growth often means choosing boundaries, choosing honesty, and choosing a future that does not repeat the past. Love, respect, and trust, when they come, must be built slowly and freely, not as rewards for suffering, but as partnerships between equals. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on it. Have you ever been judged before being heard, or witnessed someone's silence because they were easy to blame? Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments. We read them and they matter. If you believe in stories that honor dignity,